Can everyone hear me? This is the first in a long time, maybe, if ever. But I was told to make an announcement that we have an overflow room. So if anyone is not comfortable where they are and would like to have more space, we have an overflow. Trying to be funny, but this is a good thing. I'm just so glad that there's so much interest in this important conversation. So glad you all are able to make it. And I'm very excited about all the learning that's going to take place today. And it seems like we're in like a perfect, it's like all things are lining up because I get a sense of like, I don't know if it's the classroom setup or what, but like there's going to be intense learning and provoking questions. I'm Raisa Rodriguez. I'm the executive director of CCC. And it is my incredible privilege and honor to facilitate a conversation today with city leaders. Not to overshare or give too much insight into like, timing and stuff, but I started my career actually as a kindergarten teacher. And when I transitioned out of the classroom, I went to manage a department of preschool special education at a nonprofit CBO early intervention provider, right? It was an organization that mostly focused on EI services, and they were beginning to branch out and expand to CPSC services. And what stood for me, as I reflect back on the time, was just the incredible energy and commitment and passion from families and community partners wanting to make sure that children had what they need, and that as they transition to what was, K through 12 education system, right? That all the progress made, et cetera, would be protected and secured, right? So I share that as a little bit of a tidbit because I think it's a little bit of a fun fact. I also want to say that there's a couple of reasons why this initiative really is, in my view, a gem of an opportunity for us to learn and to motivate action. First is because it's like a perfect example of what CCC constantly tries to put a spotlight on, right? Which is what can happen, right? What is the potential when we have access to data, right? And not just having data for the sake of having data, but turning that data into an action plan, right? And so David's remark and the example in Brownsville, to me, that's just like a perfect example of seeing that come to life. And secondly, it's also a perfect example of what is possible when communities and parents are equipped with the resources they need to kind of push and demand for themselves and for their community. The last thing I'm going to share is that while we are in a particular important moment at this time, the issues that we're addressing and discussing are not entirely new. We've known these issues around equity. Fill in the blank, right? Again, not to date myself, but I had a great privilege of working during the Bloomberg administration. At that time, the administration was really focused on anti-poverty initiatives. And one of the things that I remember vividly working under the leadership of Deputy Mayor Gibbs was an issue around EI. And when at that time, and it'd be interesting to do a similar exercise now, when we looked at the poverty map in New York City, and you look at early intervention provision of services in New York City, it would be very close, directly inversed, right? And so to me, I think it's important to take a step back and kind of appreciate that the issues are not new, but the opportunities to innovate and to think of new strategies is. And so I am just so grateful to be joined by 4 city leaders who are engaged in some way or another in this moment that we are in. And it's such a great position of strength, I find, because we are in a moment where the administration has recognized and has prioritize childhood and early childhood services, right? And so already we are starting in a very different place. And I think that when we have an opportunity like this, some of you may have heard me speak in other areas, what a moment to think even bigger, right? If we are in such a position of strength, right, and opportunity, this is really a moment to ensure we are pushing ourselves to think even bigger and to really get it right. So that is what our conversation today is. So thank you so much. And what I want to do is maybe a little bit of a warm up, like with a rapid fire, 30 seconds, give us a preview of what you'd like to focus on for our conversation today. So maybe, Annie, I'm gonna start with you. The question is rapid fire. When you think about the moment that we are in, what's one opportunity that excites you? And maybe introduce yourselves as you're saying your quick response.
This is on. Okay, great. Well, first, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Teresa, and to CCC and all of the partners for hosting us this morning. My name is Emmy Liss. I lead the Mayor's Office of Childcare and Early Childhood Education. What really excites me about this moment is the opportunity for us to think holistically about children and the services they need and deserve. I think that with the recognition of how important early childhood education and care are under this administration, we have an opportunity to think about the connections between what happens from the time a child is born through their journey through early intervention into the preschool system and as they progress into their education. And we can think about that full continuum. I think this is an opportunity to move beyond some of the silos we often have in policy and funding and programming and think differently. Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Channing Edson. I'm the Senior Director of Special Education for the Division of Early Childhood at New York City Public Schools. And what I'm excited about is that early childhood is finally at the forefront. We often talk about K through 12, we often talk about high school, but we don't focus on early childhood, and often early childhood is the afterthought. So I am very excited that we are really putting it front and center, that families have access to quality childcare, free quality childcare. And I would also agree with Emmy that we really are breaking down the silos through this process. I can speak from the New York City Public Schools perspective. We're working more closely with early intervention. Even within our own system, we're breaking down the silos. So the Division of Early Childhood working more closely with the Division of Inclusive and Accessible Learning to really bridge those gaps that have existed for so long.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks so much for having all of us. It's great to be here. I'm Jessica Wallenstein, and I'm from the Division of Inclusive and Accessible Learning in the New York City Public Schools. I oversee the CSEs, which include the CPSEs, or the Committees on Preschool Special Education, as well as our preschool special education strategy writ large. And I think at this moment, as Emmy and Channing said, we are breaking down silos. I would say Lydia, Channing, and Emmy are some of the folks that my office is engaging with the most right now when we think about the future of preschool special ed. It's absolutely an interagency body of work. And what I heard a lot from David and others this morning is a real focus on access to service, which I think is something we'll talk about a lot today. But I would say the other major priority area is inclusion. When children transition from early intervention into preschool special ed, in addition to ensuring that children get access, something that we face a lot with the preschool population, which is only, 30%-ish overlapping with the EI population. We have a really different population when we talk about preschool special ed students and the 32,000 students we serve every year. Something that we face is segregation within our system, where we have a disproportionate number of Black and Brown boys served in separate settings. And so now that we are looking at a city that is prioritizing universal childcare, we have an opportunity of undoing that while increasing access. And so I look forward to talking more about some of that.
Hi, everyone. Lydia Ledniak, Deputy Commissioner, Division of Family and Child Health, and I oversee early intervention in New York City. It's my most favorite thing to talk about and to think about. I love this program. And I've spent so many years working with all of you on improving it and on building equity in the system. And I think that, I'm just so proud of this event and the fact that the New York City Department of Health, was really a part of building the equity collaborative. And, the Brownsville data is not the only positive data, right? So if you put another line on that chart, which is all Black children in New York City, you will see while Brownsville is still higher, I will, of course, but because of the work and the system changes that this collaborative has inspired for DOHMH has to implement, which I'll talk a little bit more about today, we've really seen a narrowing of the equity gap. And to answer your question, if you overlay poverty and race, guess what? Very similar trends emerge.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
No, we can't hear.
Can you hear? Okay, better? Thank you. So Lydia, thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership, because I do think that in many ways, I myself, I'll speak for myself, when I was digging into the initiative, just so impressed by the Department of Health's willingness to, open up access to data. It is critical for all the work that's been made possible through this collaborative. I want to start off with you, Lydia, and talk a little bit about how we reach families earlier, right? So early intervention, we all know, children need to be evaluated and services provided until the age of 3. And oftentimes, I'll speak also here from personal experience, parents, for a multitude of reasons, right, decide to engage in more information and get a child evaluated closer to the age of 2. By the time the process is underway, the child is very close to 3. So a big factor that can help us here is, deciding and identifying how we can reach families much earlier so that they can leverage and take advantage of all the offerings. Tell us what BEI continues to do to reach families much earlier.
So, onto the closest. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So thanks for the question. I will start by saying what we have been doing, and then I'm going to pivot a little bit into what we are expecting to do through to support 2K expansion. Because I think that is a critical moment for us, and I think that is really something that we all have a shared interest in. So, from specifically an early intervention standpoint, what we have been doing, again, which was inspired by lessons learned from the Equity Collaborative and United for Brownsville, is that we have started to partner a lot more deeply with our primary referral source, which is healthcare, right? And so what we've been doing since 2021, right? United for Brownsville partnership started in 2018. COVID happened, right? In 2021, we needed to rebuild our system. You saw that dip in the data. We were all very worried about it collectively. And so what we did is that we started partnering with 5 healthcare institutions, systems, to embed early intervention referrals into the fabric of electronic health records and create a bidirectional loop, data information sharing loop, in order to, 1, ensure that at the point where a delay is identified, the referral can happen seamlessly. And we have fewer and fewer sort of gatekeepers
and barriers. And so nobody tells a mom, don't read that magazine, don't stop looking at those developmental charts, right? We have a situation where referrals are happening much more seamlessly. And then we at DOHMH are pushing information status updates on where that child is in EI directly into electronic medical records. Since we initiated this partnership, and I see some of our funders in the room, so thank you for believing in us. We have received over 12,000 referrals seamlessly through electronic medical records, and we have literally shared thousands upon thousands of progress reports. And what that has allowed our partners in, community health workers, more trusted messengers in those communities to do is to follow up. And we're seeing more children make it to evaluation. And we're seeing more children make it to services in communities where comparatively those numbers have been lower than the citywide average. So I think the overall message is, because I just threw a whole lot of complex stuff at you, is that we need to make early intervention and referral to early intervention embedded in other systems, not just a training initiative, right? Not just, yes, people need to know about it, but it needs to be part of the day-to-day work of programs in order for it to be, accessible and for it to be easier. So the other thing we just did, which I'm really happy because now with 2K expansion, that mechanism is going to be leveraged more, is that in October, we launched a referral portal, which now anybody in the community can make a referral to EI, which in the rest of the state, it's still done by phone calls and faxes, right? And so I think as systems, we need to understand what the role of technology is and how to best leverage it so that we can eliminate silos and, make our systems more accessible.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I want to stay on this point a little bit of having referrals to EI embedded in different pieces and segments of systems that serve children. And I guess I'll pose a question or similar question to the rest of our panel, particularly in this moment, as we have an eye towards 2K, right? And building out a path for universal childcare. What's an opportunity you see to do just that, right? To embed, as we build, to embed, concretely the opportunity to have families engage in EI sooner.
I think building on what Lydia said, it's thinking about the whole universe of adults, trust community members who could be helping families build their awareness of EI, understand how to access it, and then support families to navigate it. And so tactically, what that looks like is mapping who are all of the adults that the parent of a young child is going to encounter before their child turns 2. Because yes, it's wonderful that with the launch of 2K, we can train 2K providers to help make those referrals for families as well. But as you've said, we want to get to families well before they turn 2 if they have a concern or have a potential need that could be addressed starting even younger. And so as we think about what does it really mean to be a city government that focuses on young children, it has to be this all of government approach. And we have to think about, again, it is pediatricians, it's community members, whether that's folks who offer social services, folks who are doing home visiting, who are in other sorts of community services, librarians, folks in housing developments, others who just are going to interact with families who may be more trusted by parents than somebody coming from the city calling and knocking and saying, do you want to bring your child? I think we have to think about how we do this kind of outreach and information building in ways that are culturally competent. We know that for some communities, the idea of early intervention can still feel really stigmatized. It feels like they're admitting that something went wrong, that maybe something was their fault, and that's of course not true. But for somebody who's been sort of acculturated that that's their mindset, there's a lot of work that we as a city can do with community partners to help overcome some of those biases, build out their understanding of the fact that this is help that is free, that is meant to support their child, and widen the universe of people who can make those not just referrals, but help coach families towards seeing the value and understanding why this might benefit their child.
You know, hearing you speak about how we have to map out. Working. Hello, there we go. Mapping out all the adults that are interacting with families. I think it also, while it's a tall task and in some ways seems insurmountable, I think you know, a lot of those adults are working within our systems. And so it also has to do with culture change among our regional offices, where we have front office staff engaging directly with families. And in many cases, I'm thinking particularly about the 11 CPSE regional offices across the city, where we have hundreds of staff. Thanks, Nora. Hundreds of staff who are often the first person, the first representative of the New York City schools system that a family is meeting. And, you know, we all know reputations over, you know, the past many years that the CPSE has been as an impenetrable system that's hard to get a response from. And so I am really proud of some of the changes that this administration is supporting in really changing the culture in our government offices, so that we are much more family focused, so that our staff understand that it is part of their job to speak about all the latest happenings in the early childhood space. So that when they're talking to a parent of a 3 or 4-year-old who has a younger sibling who may be eligible for EI, they can speak about accessing EI, they'll speak about accessing 2K. And, you know, this is something that has involved a lot of training, a lot of work on hearts and minds, but then it's also required real investments. And I'm so grateful that the city has baselined a $70 million investment from prior years, which enabled us to create tiers of staff within the CPSEs. So now every single CPSE has what we call a CPSE director of inclusion. They don't have a caseload, they're not writing IEPs, they are there to connect with early childhood programs. They'll be going out and working with Channing's team to train the new 2K providers. They're there as a single point of contact to help families navigate in each of our 11 offices, where in the past it was go to the chairperson who oversaw hundreds of staff and thousands of children. So changes like that are really about culture change, both on a mindset level and an actual staff capacity level, are a huge part of this as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, you go ahead.
Just to piggyback on what's already been said here, and just thinking about the programmatic side of it, which is where my work focuses, that even as we refer children to early intervention or CPSE in the program, there are more eyes on that on the child to support that child before they even get their recommendations. So we have a team of instructional coordinators, social workers, and inclusion specialists who are certified special educators, birth through 2, who can come in and support those teachers with strategies while the children are waiting for their services. So the child in our program is not just waiting for services and nothing is happening. There are a team of people that are already supporting that child before they even get the services. We are doing different assessment systems, and we have an assessment system of the children, as well as ASQ. What's ages, and then all of the children, all of our programs are also using the ASQ, where they're partnering with the families to say, what are you seeing at home? What are we seeing at the program? And how can we work on it together? So there is a lot of work here. As Emmy said, working with the families, we have our social workers that can work with the families and demystify often their hesitation to move towards special education services while the child is already getting support in our classrooms.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Making sure. Perfect. Thank you, guys. I definitely want to stay a little longer because so much of what you're all giving insight into speaks to workforce issues, right? And Lydia, to start with you, despite the many areas of demonstrated progress and impact We know that still families have a difficult time accessing, and some families and communities more than others, right? And so a lot of, in a lot of instances, that is due to provider shortages. And have heard CCC talk about the opportunity to engage this at the state level as well. There's advocacy underway to address some of those barriers and inadequate rates. I'm curious from your standpoint, what will it take to grow and sustain the workforce so that we have the capacity we need to meet the demand?
Since it's working. Okay. So I spent a lot of time talking about workforce issues, and I'll start by talking about the research. Through funding and partnership with CUNY Research Network, thank you to Donna, who's there. An academic research team was able to look at certification and licensure requirements across the state. And what was determined and sort of highlighted, which is something that a lot of us know, is that early intervention competencies, information about birth to 3, typical and atypical development is simply not covered, right? For the most common disciplines that we authorize in EI, right? Special instruction, speech language pathology, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. So structurally then, the state mandates an additional requirement before somebody can actually become an EI provider, an independent EI provider, which we have about 8,100 of working in New York City. So it's not very few people, it's a lot. What they require is an additional 1,000 hours of experience. Why does that requirement exist? Because it's not covered as part of licensure and certification. So what New York City has done over the years is that we have developed partnerships, academic partnerships with 5 CUNY and SUNY programs to build in early intervention into their curriculum. Maybe some of you are graduates of this program. Sure hope so. The next thing then that we did, and I'm going to get to what we need to do in a second, but I just want to sort of explain what's happened so far, is that we then worked with our local academic partners, took those competency areas to the state through the State Early Intervention Coordinating Council. Thank you, Steve. And the state then said, okay, these are the competency areas for the state. And we're like, finally. But, okay, they're just kind of hanging out by themselves. They're not required. State education department hasn't said, oh, you got to cover this stuff, right? So we need help. We need a collective moment for folks to say at the state level, these competency areas, this content needs to actually be covered so that maybe the 1,000-hour additional barrier to accessing and becoming an EI provider can fall away entirely. Maybe not, right? There's lots of opinions about that. And the other thing that I will say is then the state a month ago, because of, again, collective work in the city, instituted a academic program approval process, which basically says if an academic program builds in EI competencies into their curricula, all of their graduates will be able to offset that 1,000-hour requirement to, again, feed more therapists into the EI system to deliver these critical services. This is all really great. However, right, the issue is this. Early intervention is one of the only sectors, or the only early childhood sectors at the state level that did not receive additional workforce investment after the pandemic, which I think I want you all to know that.
Say it again.
Early intervention is the only sector that has not received, right, workforce investment after the pandemic. So what we need is workforce investment, not rates. So what we need is for there to be an investment at the state level to incentivize programs to build in these competencies into curricula all across the state and for field work placements and early intervention to count towards licensure and certification requirements. Some do, some don't. That will structurally help to build the early intervention workforce, right? In terms of rates, after a lot of collective advocacy, we've seen a 4% rate modifier for what the state is calling underserved and rural communities, which was advocacy that was actually inspired by, again, the EI Equity Collaborative. And then an additional 5% increase for in-person services. Both of those rate modifications working together weren't actually fully implemented until March 2026. But what I will say is, so we're expecting an additional $15 million a year to be paid out for early intervention services as part of these rate modifications. However, what we need to continue to do is we need to continue to look at our equity data and continue to think about and potentially make arguments about, well, do we need larger equity-based investments into rates? For many years, all EI rates were completely flat. So, to deliver a unit of OT in Brownsville, the reimbursement was the same as delivering a unit of OT, on the Upper West Side. Should it be like that? Not if you have an equity perspective, right? So that's what it's going to take, and I'm happy to have anybody else weigh in.
I think the reality of our current state as we think about early care and education, both in this moment and as we seek to expand, including early intervention, but across the entire continuum from birth to 5, is that there is no expansion of services. Frankly, we cannot sustain our current services if we do not invest in the workforce. And that has to include investing in the folks who are currently in the workforce, both in terms of compensation and benefits, but also the support that they receive to do their roles and do them well. And it means that we have to invest in building a pipeline of people to come into every part of the early care and education continuum. I think something we hear a lot from early childhood programs is how many more children have been struggling with behavioral challenges and needs, especially coming out of the pandemic. And while we want to refer as many children who could benefit from EI and other services to EI and other services, we know that there are children who may not need EI services, but would benefit from educators who have been trained in inclusive practices and strategies and can support the range of behavioral and developmental needs in their classrooms. So we have to be thinking about how we infuse that really strong background and training and education into every part of the early childhood continuum as we think about what it looks like and means to support the workforce holistically. I would just like to add a dream I have.
Please.
As a person that leads a team that often hears this child doesn't belong here, and I don't have the qualifications to handle this child, I would love for higher ed or teacher programs to stop giving the option of general ed or special ed certifications. Because even if you're not working in a special education classroom, you will have students in your classroom, children in your classroom that need special education services. So if we equip those teachers best we can as they enter the classroom, they will be more welcoming of children as they come into the classrooms and the different learning needs of those children.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Jenny. That was spot on, drop the mic moment, you know, but I want to stay there a little bit because I do think it's like that type of innovation, right? That we, you know, I spoke about this moment that we're in, and we are in a place of you know, and of strength because people in power and decision makers are listening, are prioritizing early childhood education. All those things are great. And also, it is a moment to think even bigger, right? And push ourselves even more because we're so close. And so I wanted to spend the last few minutes we have kind of like doubling down on this moment, the opportunity to create a truly seamless continuum, right? And we've never really experienced that, right? So like we have different ideas of what that could look like, right? But curious from your standpoint, as you're building this, right? What are the things that you all have your eyes towards this vision of a seamless continuum of services that can meet children's needs, and that families can navigate and go through without having to leave their full-time job, right? Not to be funny, but like with great ease, while also having an eye towards with, you know, the children who may be in most need, right? So it's, you know, not planned, but like I can't help but think about how many young children are living in family shelters, right? In what ways are we taking that into account and ensuring that resources and information are making their ways into different pockets that we know are experiencing a lot of struggle?
To go first, I think, you know, as you know, Mayor Mamdani took office and the focus on universal childcare became paramount, you know, there was this moment when all the funding packages were being submitted to support the expansion of the launch of 2K, and then, you know, the right sizing and expansion of 3K and pre-K. And what was so exciting in this iteration of this work was that, you know, our Dial's leadership was asked, what will this look like? What should this look like for children with disabilities? And it's coincidental, and the reason why Deputy Chancellor Spody and Hawkins are not here right now is because they're up at PS5 in Washington Heights announcing a massive funding package for preschool special education. And so when I think about this moment, you know, what we can do here, that is just emblematic of it. It wasn't just the launch of 2K, it was launch of 2K, and how are we going to ensure that our children with the greatest needs are also included. So not to get too wonky, but just to give some details on what's being announced uptown and will be in the news later today, is that we got another $67 million invested in this area. And with that funding, we're going to strengthen a lot of our infrastructure that I was talking about earlier. So we are increasing our CPSE capacity. We're bringing on more CPSE staff. We're bringing on more preschool evaluation teams who will be closely connected to families through our CPSE staff that work with families. We're also greatly increasing our related service team that supports all early care providers, including those CBO 3K and pre-K partners. And we're launching special education itinerant teachers in public schools for the first time ever, building on the amazing work that our community partners do, providing SEAT services and coordinating with them as well. And then the really exciting piece is that we are grading down the DOE's specialized programs. So these are our programs that specifically serve children who are autistic, as well as students with emotional difficulties and with intellectual disabilities. You may have heard Horizon, Nest, Path, ACEs. So for the first time ever, as of today, we're opening preschool, Horizon, Path, ACEs, Nest, Day. You know, when the city is saying there's a commitment to really building out the system for all, this is the start of it. You know, the numbers are small scale in terms of what we're opening this year, but we have many plans for it for years ahead where we will expand and bring this to scale. So, you know, thank you, Emmy and team, for your support, and everyone here for your partnership.
Thank you. Any other panelists would like to add? If not, I think I'll open it up at maybe two. We have time for maybe 2 questions. I'll do one from each side.
Yes, with the blue, yes. I've worked with the Legal Aid Society and with the family court setting, and I wonder if anyone, oh sorry.
My question is even closer. Okay, my question is about the involvement and I guess possible suggestion if ACS is not already involved in discussions about how to streamline or make easier the application and access for students in foster care in the early intervention systems. It's a place where we often see there are delays based on developmental monitoring. And maybe this is a great moment to reconsider how students in care and with ACS and family court involvement could be better served.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, if okay, I'm gonna turn it to you, right? Because I think that speaks to my point on, you know, how do we make sure there's an opportunity to kind of build bridges into areas that and groups that we know are struggling. And so it really, for me, speaks about an opportunity for cross-agency coordination. And so I'm curious from your standpoint, what gives you hope in terms of what we're doing and continue to build in that space?
Well, I think I can speak briefly, but then I want to hand it to Lydia to talk about some of the particular partnerships between the agencies here. But I think exactly right. We want to change, I think, in this moment, the expectation that we are talking across agencies, that we are recognizing sort of every population deserves access to these services, and for families who have struggled to access services in the past, and particularly families who are children who are in foster care, who do have to go through so many different sort of additional bureaucratic hoops in order to get the services they need. We have to start from the question of why is that the case, and how can we break down some of those barriers and think differently about the way that government can support families to access the services they need and not make it harder. But Lydia, if there's anything specific you want to say about.
So now? Okay. Yeah. So, excellent question. You know, we are really committed to working with our partners at, Advocates for Children. And as you know, they run a collaborative with foster care agencies. And one of the focuses is improving the process for early intervention access, for children, you know, in foster care. You know, so we have, you know, so to answer your question directly, you know, we've introduced a lot more data sharing recently in order to provide foster care agencies with status information about children and where they are in the EI process, and if anything is getting stuck. And particularly that has to do with, you know, establishing the nature of family rights, right? And so, you know, they are definitely at the table as we're talking about 2K expansion, and we are continuing to sort of try to innovate and find what other avenues are available to us as systems in order to continue to smooth out and streamline those processes. Thank you for bringing it up.
One last question, if this side has any. Okay, so I'll turn here and then.
Thank you. So thank you very much. And when we're thinking about early intervention, what we're seeing this day is personally is heartbreaking when we hear about center-based closing their doors. When we see families that do not speak the language, but I'm surprised that we did not address that today. In terms of how we are supporting those families that they require the additional assistance when they don't speak English, for example. I work for a parent center, and most of the families that I work with are families who do not speak the language. And I'm also a parent of kids with disabilities. And that was my journey that brought me here today. The difference is that they're 18 right now. And the same issues that I experienced 18 years ago, they're still constant today. When we're thinking about all the policies that we're doing to break down the barrier to access the evaluation process, it gets stuck when there's not providers to really come to my house and to do this job. And that's something that we still see now these days. And with CPSC, once we lost the service coordination, it's on the parent to get the RSA, which is an opportunity for them to have app services outside the school because they're not providers, the burden is on the parent. So we see this dragging their feet in terms of accessing services. And the part that I would love for us to maybe in the future to also talk about is about distribution. When parents have that right to say, listen, I did not get the services, let me go to the dispute resolution to look for the compensatory services. Those numbers, where are those numbers? What is happening in early intervention and CPSC? When we are seeing students that are not meeting the milestone, they're not really getting where they're supposed to be. And I love the announcement for today for the specialized programs. My daughter was part of the NEST program. I'm a truly believer in the public education, but these are the challenges that I think that there is so much that we need collectively to tackle right here, right now. And always through the lens of how we're going to provide access to those families that do not speak the language, who are also part of our community, in addition to be Black and brown. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. Anyone wants to take the language barriers?
There, the solution is, again, and just to go back to the point that I was making earlier, is targeted investments in workforce development, right? And particularly investments, when we think about where those investments ought to be made, they need to be made in places and institutions that have diverse student bodies, right? We have a overall shortage, right, of bilingual providers everywhere, right? And so I think that really the solution is, thinking about what are those structural remedies that we need to pursue strategically in order to actually increase the capacity amongst not only the workforce overall, but in a linguistically diverse workforce.
Thank you for raising such an important topic. And I think, something that we've learned from like the non-public provider community is this notion of the grow your own type of programs, where folks who are teacher assistants or paraprofessionals who are very often speaking languages other than English, really encouraging them to go ahead and get their credentials and move on to the next phase. In the preschool arena, that really does support us when we think about the pipeline towards special education teachers, where there's a shortage. But first and foremost, it's bilingual speech where we struggle the most. When we think about our provision rates, it's OT and it's bilingual speech. And so thinking about that sort of, innovative program, I think partnering with CUNY and SUNY and really, helping our university partners think with us about how we can do some of those grow your own partnerships. But when it comes to related services, is an important next step.
Thank you all so much for taking time and also for your leadership in this important work. And I hope I can speak for everyone in the room. I think you should lean on and count on the diversity of community partners and leaders who are really vested in ensuring we get this right. So thank you so much.